Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going on a journey, an intellectual adventure that honestly might just change the way you see everything. We're diving deep into the work of a seriously revolutionary thinker from the 20th century, a philosopher named Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Now, I get it. The word philosophy can sometimes make you think of, dusty old books and these super complicated ideas that seem like they have nothing to do with our actual real lives. And for a long, long time, a lot of Western philosophy kind of was like that. A game played in an ivory tower, trying to reason your way to some ultimate truth that was totally separate from the world. But Merleau-Ponty, he's a total game changer. He basically grabs philosophy and drags it right back down to earth, grounding it not in some abstract thought, but in the messy, amazing, undeniable experience of being a living, breathing body in the world. He makes us ask the biggest question there is: what is real? But his answer isn't some new complicated system. It's more like a new pair of glasses, a new way to see our own lives, a way to take back the power of our own direct experience. So this isn't just a lecture, it's really an invitation to rethink everything you thought you knew about where you end and the world begins.
Okay, this question right here, this is the key. This unlocks everything we're about to get into. Let's just sit with it for a second, because the whole conflict that Merleau-Ponty wants to solve is packed right into this one sentence. So on one side, you've got the world as you think it. This is the objective world, right? The world of science, of facts, of concepts. It's the world where you know intellectually that the table in front of you isn't really solid. It's mostly empty space, just a buzzing cloud of atoms. It's the world where you know the Earth is a big ball spinning through the cosmos, even though everything in your body tells you you're on flat, stable ground. This thought world, it's an amazing achievement of the human mind. We build it from data, from measurements, from theories, and it's incredibly powerful. It lets us build bridges and send rovers to Mars. But then there's the other world, the world as you live it. This is the world of your immediate direct experience, the one you perceive through your body right this second. It's the solid feel of that table under your hands. It's the unshakable feeling of the ground holding you up. It's the splash of color on a book cover that just grabs your eye. This lived world isn't an idea you have, it's a presence you are swimming in. It's the world you move through without thinking, the one you are a part of, not just some detached observer looking at it. And Merleau-Ponty's big, radical idea is that we've made a huge mistake by saying the thought world is more real than the lived world. He's going to argue that the scientific, abstract world is and can only ever be a secondhand story that we tell about the rich foundational reality of our lived bodily experience.
Now, to really feel the weight of this idea, we can't just jump to the end. We have to walk the path that Merleau-Ponty himself walked. So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to set the stage and really appreciate just how deep this problem of reality goes. Then we're going to take apart the two main theories that he thought led everyone down the wrong path, what he called the classical prejudices. We got to clear the ground before we can build something new. And that new thing is his big idea, the concept of the body as subject. That's the real hero of our story today. And once we get what he means by that, we can finally step into the world that it reveals to us, the lived world. We'll explore what that actually feels like. And then finally, we'll bring it all back home and ask, okay, so what? Why does this matter? And see how these ideas can actually give us some powerful tools for seeing our own world in a whole new way.
So let's kick things off with part one of our journey. What even is reality? This is not a small question. It's one of the oldest and toughest problems in all of human thought. For literally thousands of years, the smartest people have been wrestling with this gap between our inner world of thoughts and feelings and the external world out there. Think of Plato's famous allegory of the cave, where he suggests we're all just prisoners staring at shadows on a wall, mistaking them for the real thing. Or think about René Descartes, who famously doubted everything until he was left with just one single certainty: I think, therefore I am. Which sounds great, but it left him with this huge, terrifying problem of how he could ever be sure that anything outside his own mind, including his own body, was even real. And that created this deep, deep split between the mind and the world. Later on, you had Immanuel Kant, who tried to fix this by saying, well, sure, there's a world out there, but we can never know it as it really is. We can only know it as our minds shape and structure it. But in all of these cases, you see the same basic puzzle. How do we get from these subjective feelings inside our heads, the colors, the sounds, the textures, to the stable, shared, objective world of things out there? How do I know the red I see is the same as the red you see? This problem of perception became this huge philosophical battleground. And this is where Merleau-Ponty comes in, not with just another answer, but by saying the question itself is wrong. He suggests that the very first mistake philosophy ever made was separating an inner mind from an outer world in the first place.
And that brings us right to the second stage of our exploration. Before Merleau-Ponty can build up his own idea of reality, he first has to show us why the old ways of thinking are broken. He takes aim at what he calls the classical prejudices, these two major schools of thought that basically owned the conversation about perception for centuries. Now, on the surface, they look like they're complete opposites, fighting with each other for ages. But Merleau-Ponty is going to show us that they're really just two sides of the same fake coin, because they're both built on that same fundamental mistake, the split between mind and world. And it's so important to understand why he thinks they're wrong, because their assumptions aren't just stuck in old philosophy books, they've totally trickled down and shaped how we, just in our everyday lives, think about how we see the world.
Okay, so let's dig into these two flawed answers. First, you've got empiricism, which you might associate with thinkers like John Locke or David Hume. The empiricist idea is that your mind starts out as a total blank slate, and then the world just kind of stamps itself onto you through your senses. It sends you these little separate packets of raw data. A spot of red here, a sound there, a feeling of warmth, a rough texture. And so your perception of something complex, like an apple, is just the grand total of all these little sensations added up. A bit of red, a round shape, a sweet smell, a smooth feel. In this view, your mind is basically a passive bucket, just collecting all these states of consciousness. But Merleau-Ponty says this is a complete misreading of how we actually experience things. He says we never, ever, ever experience a pure sensation all by itself. That patch of red is always the red of the book, which is sitting on the desk, which is in the room. The world comes to us as a meaningful whole, not as a bunch of random sensory pixels we have to assemble. Empiricism basically turns us into passive recording machines. Then on the other side of the debate, you have intellectualism, which is represented by thinkers like Kant. And the intellectualist looks at the empiricist idea and says, no, that can't be right. Raw data is just noise. For them, the mind has to be an active organizer. It takes all the meaningless sensations the world throws at it and slaps some order onto them using concepts and judgments. So for an intellectualist, perception is really an act of thinking, like a little unconscious math problem. When we see a cube, they would say we're getting all these different sensory inputs, different shapes, different shadings, and our intellect makes a judgment. Aha, all these different feelings logically mean there's a three-dimensional cube out there. But Merleau-Ponty finds this is just as disconnected from reality. We don't deduce that it's a cube, we just see the cube. The cubeness of it is there from the very start. It's not a conclusion we figure out later. Intellectualism turns the vibrant living act of seeing into a cold, sterile logic problem, and it makes our consciousness into this kind of dictator that imposes its own rules on a meaningless world.
And here it is. This is the big aha moment. The single unifying mistake that connects both of these seemingly opposite theories is this. They both start by assuming there's a fundamental split between an internal mind and an external world. They put a subject over here and an object over there, and then they spend all their time trying to figure out how to build a bridge between the two. Empiricism says the world builds the bridge to the mind with sensations flowing across it. Intellectualism says the mind builds the bridge to the world by imposing its structures on it. But either way, the mind and the world are treated like two totally separate things, like two foreign countries trying to figure out how to communicate. Merleau-Ponty's revolution is to just say, stop. That initial separation is a complete fiction. We don't start out as these little isolated minds that have to somehow find their way to a world. No, our most basic fundamental state is that we are already in the world. Consciousness isn't a spectator looking at the world through the windows of the senses. Consciousness is born in the world, tangled up with it, and part of it from the very first breath.
This single sentence from his masterpiece, Phenomenology of Perception, is basically his declaration of independence from all those old ideas. It's the flag he's waving for his whole philosophy. Let's break it down. The world is not what I think. That's him taking a direct shot at intellectualism. The world, the real world, isn't my collection of ideas about it. It's not my scientific models. It's not my logical judgments. All that stuff comes later. It's secondary. But what I live. And that's the core of it. The world is this pre-conscious, immediate, all-around-me experience that I am completely immersed in through my body every single moment of every single day. And this isn't just him being poetic. This is the cornerstone of his entire method. He's making a promise to describe the world as it's actually given to us in our lived experience, before we start chopping it up with our intellect into subjects and objects.
Okay, so if we throw out this idea of a detached mind that builds the world with its thoughts, what do we have instead? Well, this leads us to the absolute heart of Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, our third section, the body as subject. This is where he brings in the missing piece of the puzzle, the one thing that both empiricism and intellectualism completely missed or got wrong, the body. But, and this is so important, he doesn't mean the body as an object. He's not talking about the body that you learn about in biology class, a machine made of tissues and organs and chemicals. He means the lived body, the corp probe, the body as we experience it from the inside out, as the very center of our world. For Merleau-Ponty, our body isn't just another object in the world, sitting there next to a chair or a tree. No, our body is the very reason we have a world at all. It's the anchor that makes perception even possible. And to prove this radical idea, he doesn't use abstract logic, he uses real, concrete examples from our lives.
So let's start with a really fascinating and strange example, the phantom limb. This is when someone has had an arm or a leg amputated, but they continue to feel vivid sensations, like an itch or a pain, or even just the feeling of it being in a certain position, in the limb that isn't physically there anymore. So how do the old theories explain this? Well, empiricism has no answer at all. Its whole foundation is sensory input, but there are no nerves in the missing limb to send signals. There's no stimulus, but there's still a perception. So that's out. Intellectualism is just as lost. The person knows with 100% intellectual certainty that their limb is gone. They've made the judgment, they accept the fact. And yet, the feeling persists, completely ignoring what their logical mind is telling them. Merleau-Ponty says the phantom limb is like a perfect window into how perception really works. It shows us that our body has a kind of memory and a life of its own. He calls the phantom limb, in this really haunting phrase, an old present that doesn't decide to become past. Our perception isn't just a reaction to what's happening right now. It's layered with our history, with our habits, with our potential. The phantom limb is the body insisting on its old, familiar way of being in the world. It's a style of being that just keeps going, a lived history that is more real and more powerful than both the lack of physical sensation and the intellectual knowledge that the limb is gone.
Okay, now for a more common example, one you've probably seen in a psychology textbook, the Mueller-Lyer illusion. You've got two lines that are exactly the same length, but because of the little fins on the ends, one looks way longer than the other. Once again, the classical theories just can't handle it. Empiricism fails because the raw data, the image hitting your retina, is of two lines of the same length. If perception was just adding up sensations, we should see them as equal. Intellectualism fails even harder. You can literally take out a ruler and measure the lines. You can prove to yourself with total certainty that they are identical. You can make the explicit judgment, I know for a fact these lines are equal. And yet, you still see one as longer. The perception just doesn't care what your intellect knows. So what's going on? Merleau-Ponty says it's because we aren't perceiving two abstract, flat lines on a page. Our perception, which is rooted in a body that's built to move through a three-dimensional world, sees something more. The lines are seen in a context. As the source says, they don't belong to the same universe. The one with the fins pointing in looks like the inside corner of a room, which our body reads as being closer. The other one, with the fins pointing out, looks like the outside corner of a building, which our body reads as being farther away. Our body perceives a world of depth and possibility, not just flat shapes. The meaning, the context, the depth, isn't something we add on later with our thoughts. It's baked right into the perception from the very beginning.
And for his third piece of evidence, Merleau-Ponty attacks the basic idea that our five senses are separate channels. We're taught to think of sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell as five different things. But he argues that's just an artificial idea that science came up with. He points to things like synesthesia, what the source calls the vision of sounds or the audition of colors, and says these aren't just weird glitches. No, he says synesthetic perception is the rule. They actually show us the real underlying unified way our body experiences the world, a unity we've just been taught to ignore. The source gives these great examples. Like a certain loud, shrill sound can actually make a color seem brighter, more intense. A deep, low sound can make the color blue seem even deeper. He explains that the color red isn't just a neutral quality, it's an amplification of our motor being. It has this expansive, aggressive feeling that makes our body want to act, while blue feels more like repose and concentration. This shows that a sensation isn't just the passive reception of some dead quality. It is, in his words, the experience of a certain modality of existence, a synchronization of my entire body with the world. My whole body responds to that color, to that sound. Our senses are all talking to each other all the time because they're all part of one single unified lived body.
So all of this evidence brings us to this huge central idea, the body subject, or corp prop. Now, this is a profound concept, so let's unpack it. He's saying our body is not an object in the world, not in the same way a rock or a table is an object. I can look at those things from a distance, I can walk around them, I can treat them as separate from me, but my body? I can never get that kind of external view of it. It's the very vantage point from which I see everything else. It is my active, living medium for having a world. Without my body, there's no here from which to see a there. There's no up or down, no near or far. My body is the 0 point of my entire world, the silent anchor that makes a world of space and objects even possible. And that's why it's the true subject, the active agent of perception, not just a passive object. And this one idea completely reframes the whole mind-body problem. Instead of asking how a non-physical mind connects to a physical body, Merleau-Ponty says my consciousness was always an embodied consciousness. My mind doesn't live in my body like some ghost in a machine. My thinking, my feeling, my perceiving, all of it is the activity of a living body.
Now that we've got the lived body as the true center of perception, we are ready for the grand finale, the big payoff. We've cleared away the old, broken theories and we've laid a new foundation. So now, we can finally step into the reality that this new perspective opens up for us. This brings us to Section 4. Welcome to the lived world. Merleau-Ponty calls this the monde vécu, and this is the world as we experience it, directly, fundamentally, before we start drawing grids on it with science, or trapping it in nets of language, or filtering it through abstract thought. And to help us really get the massive difference between this primary world and the objective world of science, he uses this beautiful, simple, and incredibly powerful analogy. And that analogy is this: the map is not the territory. So let's start with the map. The source describes this as the world of science and abstraction. Think about a geographical map. A map is an amazing tool, right? It's a secondary, abstract determination or explanation. It can show you distances, property lines, how high a mountain is. It's precise, it's objective, and it's incredibly useful for getting around. But no matter how detailed that map gets, it will never, ever be the land it represents. You can't feel the cool wind on your face, or smell the pine needles, or hear the river by looking at the map. The map is a second expression, a story about the world. Now let's think about the territory. This is the lived world. The source describes this as the actual landscape, the primary experience of the forest, the meadow, the river. This is the world you actually walk through with your body. It's the feeling of the rough tree bark under your hand, the way the sunlight filters through the leaves and dapples on the ground, that feeling of awe when you're standing in front of a real mountain. The territory is always richer, messier, more ambiguous than any map could ever be. It's the primary reality. And Merleau-Ponty's big critique of Western thought is that for centuries, we've gotten so obsessed with making better and better maps, our scientific theories, our logical systems, that we've completely forgotten about the living, breathing territory they're supposed to be describing. We've mistaken the explanation for the real thing.
So what are the main features of this lived world, this territory that we all live in? Let's go through them. First, it is pre-reflective. We don't have to think about the world to be in it. As the source says, our basic relationship with the world is an unreflected life. We walk through rooms, we open doors, we catch things that fall without any conscious thought. We live our world long before we ever start thinking about it. Second, the lived world is inexhaustible. We can never, ever fully capture it or explain it. I love how the source puts this. I am open to the world, but I do not possess it. It is inexhaustible. No matter how much you know about something, you can always look at it from a new angle, notice some new detail. The world is always bigger than our ideas about it. Third, it is foundational. And this is a huge point. Science is not a better kind of knowledge that proves our perceptions are wrong. It's the other way around. The lived world is the very ground that science is built on. As the source says, the universe of science is constructed on the lived world. We must first reawaken this experience of the world, of which science is the second expression. And finally, the lived world is shared. This isn't some retreat into your own private little dream world. No, it's the public common ground where we all exist. It's in this shared landscape that we meet other people, that we understand what they mean from their gestures, and that we communicate. It's the foundation of our shared reality, our being in the world together.
And that brings us to our final section. We have traveled through some pretty dense and challenging ideas. We've taken apart these long-held beliefs about the mind and the world, and we've built a new foundation with the lived body at its center. But the big question is still there. So what? Why does any of this complicated philosophy actually matter in our real everyday lives? Well, this is where Merleau-Ponty's work stops being just academic and becomes a truly powerful tool. Something that can give us not just a new way to think, but a totally new way to see and to live.
If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Merleau-Ponty's philosophy re-enchants our reality. I mean, we live in a time that's always trying to reduce the world to data, to explain every mystery away with a mechanism, to treat our experience as just subjective noise compared to objective fact. And that can make us feel kind of alienated, right? Like our own personal experience of the world is somehow less real or less important than the scientific story about it. Merleau-Ponty's work is the perfect antidote to that. It validates your direct, personal, embodied perception. It tells you that the way the world seems to you, with all its moods and its textures and its ambiguities, is not a mistake or a second-rate illusion. It's meaningful, it's primary, it is the fabric of reality itself. He gives us permission to trust the wisdom of our own senses and to find meaning not in abstract theories, but in the rich, immediate presence of the world all around us. He gives us back a sense of depth and wonder and legitimacy to our own lives.
So how can we actually start doing this? Here are 3 ways to begin seeing the world anew through this Merleau-Pontian lens. First, trust your experience. The next time you're walking outside, don't just think about biology. Actually feel the air. Notice the texture of a leaf. See the way the light hits the buildings. Let yourself just be present to the experience itself. That perception isn't less true than the scientific explanation. It's a more fundamental kind of truth. Second, recognize your body's wisdom. Pay attention to its quiet intelligence. Notice how you automatically lean into a turn when you're driving, or how you can just feel the vibe of a room when you walk in. Your body isn't just a taxi for your brain. It's your main tool for knowing the world, and it has a deep, intuitive wisdom of its own. And third, see the world as a landscape, not just a map. Appreciate science for the incredible map that it is. Use it, learn from it, be amazed by it, but never ever mistake it for the territory. The lived world will always be more complex, more mysterious, and more wonderful than any map we could ever draw of it.
And we'll end with this one final quote from the source, a sentence that just perfectly sums up everything he was trying to do. True philosophy is to relearn to see the world. For Merleau-Ponty, the point of philosophy isn't to build bigger and better abstract systems or to escape the world into some realm of pure ideas. It's the complete opposite. The job is to come back to the world, to patiently and carefully peel away all the layers of intellectual prejudice that have been clouding our vision. It's about trying to see the world again with that same freshness and wonder we had as kids, before we were taught that we shouldn't trust our own senses. It's about getting back to the things themselves, back to the rich, bottomless mystery of our own lived lives.
So I'm going to leave you with this final question to think about. If Merleau-Ponty is right, if your body isn't just an object you own, but is your fundamental anchor in reality, your very medium for having a world at all, then what does it know that you, your thinking mind, haven't learned yet? What quiet wisdom is stored in its habits, in its skills, in its feelings, and in its own unique way of being in the world? Exploring that question, that's the beginning of relearning to see your world. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.